as the policy is currently written.
I'm pretty much inclined myself to stick with the status quo, not to enhance and not necessarily to detract from the status quo unless there is a good cause to do either. But anyway, I've got other questions. Councillor Stewart.
Just picking up what Councillor Quacks was talking about with the car parking, I and I'm sure a few others here, when we've been attending hearings, and it might be an all-day hearing in a council building, and we park outside, and councillors don't have the Auckland Transport card that I believe the local board members have. Do the local board members still get the parking card?
No, they don't.
No.
So,
Okay.
so the question is there any provision for councillors on business to have parking costs met? If so, what is it?
It's just that when you're, I don't mind.
Yeah.
Really, but to be perfectly honest, if you're in a hearing, and the hearing's probably an all-day hearing, and there's only car parking for 30 minutes or 60 minutes, you have to keep hopping up, going outside, moving the car, or getting somebody else to move the car. So I just wondered, in those circumstances, when councillors are somewhere in a council building with council car parking outside, and we know that we're going to be there for all day, could we not all just have an Auckland Transport card just for that one day, or whatever it is, or we'll have to just keep on excusing ourselves and moving the car. So I'm just.
So Auckland Transport has removed the use of all-day car parks.
They have.
Yes, they have.
Because I've noticed a lot of, not only that, but I've noticed a lot of council cars and staff had the Auckland Transport cards as well. Are they not using those now? Even private cars, I noticed they were using them. No.
They've stopped doing that.
Okay,
Not to
that's
my
all right.
knowledge.
Thank you. I just
Okay,
wanted that
thank
clear.
you. Last question, Councillor Darby.
I had a question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just on 5.3, travel around Auckland, that's probably the area where we spend quite a bit of money on our own travel, and it's good to see the emphasis on public transport there and cycling. Though my question is, some of that language just seems to not heed modern day Auckland. When we look at how we move, it's not just by private vehicle, it's car share schemes. I use car share schemes, and they're not mentioned there, and that's the Ubers, the Zoomies, the City Hop, Your Drive. So I'm just wondering if that can be updated to reflect what is available in Auckland now. And the other thing I'd like to just point out that I'm a bike rider. Today I rode a bike, and I know some other councillors rode a bike here today, and I know that's not possible for most members. But technically, this document, as it's written, allows me to claim mileage for my bike, which I would not do. But I'm just pointing that out as it's not real. It's not waking up to what Aucklanders really are doing and wanting to do. This is just sitting in a.
So we've got two questions there. One, I'm interested. Can you claim mileage for a bike? I'd be surprised. But two, could this have been updated to take into account some of the sensible things that Councillor Darby has been talking about?
So if the wording in the policy implies or makes you understand that you can claim a mileage for your bike, we need to amend it so that we make clear it's not intended to do that. And the second question about whether we could add shared schemes or some kind of wording that we can agree on in 5.3, yes, of course we can.
So why don't we just add shared vehicle or other arrangements or something along those lines? Councillor Darby, is that would meet your need?
Sure, the staff will work it out.
Yep. So we add something like that, and clarifying that if you came by bike, no, sorry, you can't claim for it. I've got a question from Councillor Simpson next.
Your Worship, I want to know why in the previous term, when approval for travel has always been the role of the Mayor or the Deputy Mayor, has gone to staff.
Can you refer me to the
Page
appropriate...
151. approvals for domestic travel outside Auckland was with the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor or the Chair of the Committee of a Whole. It is now with the Governance Director or the General Manager of Democracy Services.
So are you looking at table 124, approvals for domestic travel outside Auckland? Was the previous term was the Mayor or the Chair of the Committee of the Whole, and it's no change.
Yeah.
Page 151.
151, approvals for domestic travel outside of Auckland. Previously,
Come down one. Approvals for
approved the domestic travel outside of Auckland
Councillors.
councillors.
That was for the Mayor.
Governance Director or General Manager. Can we have an answer to that, Marguerite?
Yes, so we had quite a lot of pushback in the previous term about the amount of work that some of those approvals were taking. And we've tried to put in place something that was a little bit more manageable. Some of the committees of the whole chairs or the mayor were not always finding it particularly practical.
But the
but my point
criteria won't have changed, simply the person approving it.
In every other case, it's an elected member almost, except for those last two boxes, approvals of domestic travel for local board chairs and councillors. Everything else looks to be elected member approval.
So in the last term, we had a very strong pushback from some local board chairs who flatly refused to approve expenses for their local board members. And
that was something else. That was expenses more widely. This is just travel.
Is there a problem in principle with having to approve it?
I'm not saying. I'm
Because
just
sure as
asking
hell
a
I don't want to
question.
spend my time approving
You're approving pretty much
domestic
everything
travel.
else. So I'm just saying elected members pretty much approve everything else. We're handing the responsibility in this particular area of travel
Yep.
to staff. And I just wondered why, out of all the other things,
Yep.
those two areas went to staff.
Got some pushback.
Well, I'm not going to guess the reason why, so I'm going to leave that to Marguerite. But I can volunteer that I wouldn't want to spend large periods of my day approving things. If the criteria is very clear, then that could be carried out by an official rather than an elected representative, and unless you feel that there is something wrong in principle about
No, I was
that.
just asking a question when everything else, I mean, you could argue that using your argument that they could approve most things.
Well, that's why I asked the question. Presumably the criteria will apply equally whether it's the elected representative or the official doing it. Is that correct?
yes, so there is no other reason than trying to be consistent between local boards and the governing body, trying to take into consideration some of the concerns that local board members had in the previous term and some practical reasons. But if you want to revert back,
I'm just asking a question.
No,
it is a
think-
possibility.
I think Councillor Simpson's asking a question as to why, and I didn't know the answer why, but I was just saying that I was very happy about it if that was one less responsibility I had to.
And we do it for international, we don't do it for domestic, and I just wanted to know.
Yeah,
why.
international, I think you're talking about larger sums of money and maybe it's appropriate. Okay, councillors, I think we've had a fairly extensive discussion. We've made the one minor change relating to the comments made by Councillor Darby. Otherwise, it's already been moved by Councillor Wayne Walker and Councillor John Watson that we adopt the elected members' expense policy 2016, authorise the General Manager Democracy Services to make minor typographical edits or amendments to the policy to correct any identified errors. Right, any debate about that? We actually morphed between questions and comments. That is my fault, I apologise for it. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'll be very brief. I just wanted to take the opportunity, notwithstanding the fact that I've actually seconded this, is to very quickly point out the entirely anomalous nature of the business class travel, and I hope that will be reflected in the delegations of approval. If you look at the actual wording there, 6 hours continuously could mean quite easily that someone could arrive at a country at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, not have to present or do their work to 10 or the next day, and that's been given as a justification for business travel. I would suggest for most people that just wouldn't stack up. And in terms of the work getting undertaken, what one would have to assume that it'd be a fairly onerous type of work to justify that in the first instance. They're not getting out turning out for the All Blacks or the Kiwis the next day, or giving a keynote speech to the United Nations. I think the nature of council business as a justification for business class travel, and which is often 3 or 4 times the price of an economy seat, just wouldn't stack up. So I don't want to prolong matters, Mr. Mayor, but I would hope that the people giving the approvals would just make it very clear to any potential recipient that that's not really desirable, and that if they do want to do that, they should stump up the difference themselves. I think that's what the ratepayers would expect.
I think everybody around the table would agree with that. I do know, however, from extensive experience that sometimes you've got to fly all night and then you've got to be on top form as soon as you land. And if you haven't slept that night, you're not doing service to your country or your council. But it needs to be interpreted and not rorted. And anybody rorting that would have to accept the consequences and ought to accept the consequences. It's got to be taken seriously. We're spending the ratepayers' money. We should spend it as we would spend our own money. That's
careful.
the basic principle.
Yep, just go to Rio.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to put that, no further discussion. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. To the contrary,
No, recorded.
no, and carried with one dissenting voice. Right, can we move now to item number 13? And I'm not going to ask Sandra to move to the other end of the table because it's a fairly mechanical issue. That's confirming the process for urgent political decision making over the next 3 Christmas periods.
I move.
It's been moved by Councillor Filipaina and seconded by Councillor Collins. Just note on that if it's a matter of a serious and major public issue, then we would call an emergency meeting of council. Otherwise, I think it's common sense. Do we have any questions first of all? If not, any comments, any debate? Otherwise, I'll put that motion. Those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 14 is in relation to the disposal of land at Lowtherhurst Reserve
Happy to
to
move, Mr
the
Chairman.
New Zealand.
I'm well aware of this and supportive of it. It's been
Okay.
canvassed last year.
So moved and seconded by Councillor Filipaina. Again, is there any discussion?
Just noting, Mr Chairman, that the proceeds of the sale go to the Henderson Massey Local Board as a growth area.
Yeah.
So that normally it would go into the main coffers, but because it's a high growth area, it will go towards buying parkland and other growth areas in that local board.
Fine. I think that's straightforward. Nigel, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, that's fine.
Maybe in
So-
6
I'll just-
hours.
Councillor Darby?
No, look, I'm just noting 14 where there's discrepancy between our valuation and NZTA's, and that I just look at that and looks at around about $266 a metre at $2 million. Even that is low. So I'm just urging our staff to get the very best out of that disposal in terms
Fine,
of compensation.
Take that on board. Any further discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. Can we
Want to live there.
look
It's under
at,
a motorway.
if I can bring forward
Under a
agenda
motorway.
item 17, because I think it will be equally straightforward. It's to recommend that we make appointment to the Parakai Recreation Reserve Board. This was a position previously held. We have 3 people appointed by the council, 2 from the local board and 1 from the governing body, previously held by Penny Webster, and I think the obvious person to put on that would be Councillor Greg Sayers.
Yep.
Are there any questions about that item?
I'm happy to move it.
Moved by Councillor Fletcher, seconded by Councillor Quacks. Those discussion, those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. Carried. Now, the next item should be dealt with just as quickly. It's the question of appointments to the Auckland Transport Board and the accountability of Auckland Council-controlled organisations. And welcome to the table David Wood, who works in my office as a finance director of finance and policy. And I will move the recommendations as set out accordingly, just noting the change on recommendation C. I'm not sure whether we have added that in relation to making the Appointments and Performance Review Committee, having assessed the opportunities to improve strategic alignment, accountability and responsiveness, to make recommendations back to this governing body. I think it's appropriate that this governing body approve those recommendations. So I will move that. Have I got a seconder?